thank you, Linda, for that, because we're actually, a big emphasis we're going to talk about today is trust, which I think that maybe sometimes goes hand in hand. I didn't sleep last night, but it was for a much more shallow reason than that. Some of you know I was roped, coerced. I don't know what the right word is, into coaching these elementary boys, and they're basically just animals. It's herding cats, man. It's like trying to get them to do whatever. We had a game yesterday, and it didn't go our way, and there were a couple of things that I was not proud of at the end of it, and was frustrated with myself. I was frustrated with a lot of things, and so I easily saw 3 a.m. this morning. I did not have a book by David Jeremiah to go look at or to go read. But at some point around there, I did fall asleep, and I was reminded in the middle of the night that who am I trusting? Who am I trusting around ridiculous things as 5th and 6th grade boys basketball? Who am I trusting? Right? Today, we're going to look at chapter 3 of Proverbs. That's our agenda for today. And we're going to read a verse today that I'll hazard a guess you've heard or read or whatever sometime before. It's a reasonably famous verse. And so because of that, I want to focus us this morning through the lens of trust. I'm going to focus us this morning through the lens of trust. But before we get to trust, I need to calibrate you. I like to, I shouldn't say I like to, sometimes I accidentally do this, but I think we need to layer a few things in here this morning to make sure that we're in the right place, right? I want to help make this lesson welcome to you this morning. Last week, I had the privilege and the challenge to preach, and somehow, with seeing everybody back here, it looks like we survived that. For those of you that ever look for evidence of God's grace, I just look no further than a Sunday where I'm asked to stunt double for Pastor John. But part of my preparation for Sunday is I like to go to worship rehearsal on Wednesday night. I go to worship rehearsal on Wednesday night because my intent is to try to just help those things. This is the intentionality stuff, Bob. It was like, how can we be intentional about getting all these things together? How can we be active to have a greater connection between what the worship set is and what the message is? It doesn't surprise any of you that that's got to be easier on a week that Trace leads, right? Because then some things go back and forth. Like she'll say things like, "Do you know what you're going to preach on Sunday?" And I'll say, "Not a clue." So it goes back and forth like that. And then all of a sudden it's like, I'm sorry.
It's not helpful when you.
It's not helpful, no. And we'll get to Saturday about 8:30 at night, and she's like, "You know what you're talking about tomorrow?" And no. That's an exaggeration, but we look at this and we say, how can we blend these things together? But if you ever have the privilege of attending a rehearsal, the worship team starts off with a devotion, and Trace led the devotion 10 days ago, Wednesday, or however many days ago that was. And she asked a question around what makes a household. And it was an interesting question because it sort of dovetailed nicely into something that I was learning around the book of Proverbs. And there were several comments in the room. It led me to ask a couple of terrible questions. Now, it's been a while since I've asked you a bunch of bad questions. I'm going to do my best to ask you some good, bad questions, right? So, with God, what type of government do we live under? With God, what type of government do we live under? A just? There's a special name for the form of government. A theocracy? Okay. I was looking for a monarchy. And who's the head of a monarchy? A king. All right? So we have a king. Now, if God's the king, the question that I threw out was this. If God's the king, what is your office in that government? What title would you have? Servant? Anybody else? Representative? Anybody else? What is your relationship to God?
This is my favorite answer. I'm a princess.
If God is your father and God is the king, what is your title?
Children.
What is your title?
Prince.
Prince. Prince. Or princess. You know that? You know that? I share that with you because I think there's a lot of us that either we don't know it or we forget it or whatever, because like we're in the world and the world comes after us. And sometimes we get a little sideways, like 5th and 6th grade boys at a basketball game. We get a little sideways and we can forget who we are. We can forget that. Do you believe that you are a prince or princess? Do you trust that you are a prince or princess? Now, I'm not getting a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings here, so we're going to get a little interactive. Look at your neighbor. Tell your neighbor that, as appropriate, I'm a prince or I'm a princess. All right, all right. Now, to look at your other neighbor and say, and I am a prince or princess. All right, you need to know this. You will stand differently if you think of yourself as a prince or princess. You will. You will absolutely stand differently. The enemy comes after us all the time, and one of the strategies that he likes for us to question is our identity. Who are you? He likes to cast doubt. Who are you that you would do this? Why on earth would God use someone like you? Have you heard that voice? All those things you've done. Why on, he must be wrong about you. Remember who you are. You are a prince or a princess. Now, I want you to know I'm not making this up. So if you would, turn with me to the book of Romans. Romans chapter 8, verses 14, 15, 16, and 17. Those of you who are highlighters or underliners, do so as appropriate through this passage. But Paul writes, "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God." The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children, princes and princesses. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings in order that we may share in his glory. So I want you to know this morning that we are children of the King. And I want you to know that makes you royalty. That makes you royalty. Now, a king governs an area known as a kingdom. A couple weeks ago, we talked about in the springtime when kings go off to war. Why do kings go off to war? To expand their territory, to increase their kingdom. Now, here's the question I want you to consider next. In a kingdom, what does the king own? Everything. The king owns everything. Back in school and social studies, when we studied I think it was probably when we studied the Middle Ages. What do I know? I don't remember passing the class. I guess I did. But in social studies, we learned about the serfs, right? There were people who would just work the land for the king, and they would get to keep some portion, but the rest all went to the king. Why did the rest all go to the king? Because the king owns everything. The king owns everything. And so, as children of the king, as heirs, what do we own? Everything. This isn't a new thought. This is something that we see in creation, right? Genesis chapter 1, verses 26, 27, and 28, if you want to follow along. I like the King James version of this. I'm going to read that translation this morning. It says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion." That's a word you use every day, isn't it? That's a fun word. Circle that word. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them. And God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. Dominion. The king has dominion. Now we know in the story of Adam, this is the start. God creates Adam, he puts him in the garden, and Adam and Eve have dominion. They have authority over everything. And what do? They mess it up. That's a technical term. I don't know if you've ever been there before, but mess up is what we're going to call it today. And what they did is they turned that authority over to the enemy. And that's the way things were for a long time until Jesus shows up. And when Jesus shows up, he gets that authority back. On the cross, Jesus gets the authority back. And we could take 6 weeks and we could unpack that. Just go with me here if this is a little fuzzy for you, okay? After that, as Jesus is walking the earth, he starts handing out some authority. Turn with me, if you would, to Luke chapter 10, verse 19. Trying to keep up with Bob. Bob used like 5,000 scripture. We read pretty much the whole Bible last week. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't turn the pages fast enough. Trying to keep up with you, Bob. Jesus gives his disciples some authority during his ministry in Luke 10:19. Jesus says, I have given you authority. I have given you dominion to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. That's what he gives his believers. And then at the Great Commission, turn back a couple of pages, Matthew 28, verses 18, 19, and 20. We've looked at this, I don't know how many times. But it says, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority, all dominion in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Jesus transfers his authority to you and me. We are brothers, we are sisters, we are princes, we are princesses, we are co-heirs, as Paul writes. Remember who you are. Now, in a completely separate study that I'm doing now, I was reminded of this. Now, before I've taught you on the 7 laws of creation, and I'm not going to bore you with all of that today because I know it can be a little bit dry. It's exciting to guys like me, but that's what makes guys like me, right? But the first and the most important law of creation is the law of cause and effect, right? And you've heard me talk about this before. For every effect, there's some type of cause. There's something. What starts here, A leads to B, right? And the absurd example that I give you is that when you, and the variable is always the A, right? The variable is always the A. I use the example that you don't take an old tennis shoe, some bubble gum, and some dental floss, put it in a pan, put it in the oven, and expect a birthday cake to come out, right? We don't have the right causes to get the right effect. But if we take some milk and some flour and some eggs, and maybe, I don't know what else goes there, chocolate, you put some chocolate in there, like you mix it up, you put it in the pan, you put it in the oven, you have a chance that you get the cake. You have the chance to have the cake. And I share this because as princes and princesses, I want to remind you this morning, God created us in his image. And because of that, we are to be causative. We are to live on the cause side of cause and effect. Right? There's a lot of people who will look around and they're going to say, look at all my effects around me. Look at all this stuff. I'm trapped. God did not make you to be an effect. He made you to be a cause. And a little micro lesson that I teach on this, and I can teach in about 2 sentences, is the word because. Because is a compound word. It's made up of be and cause to remind you to be the cause. Be the cause. That's what God intends us to do as princes and princesses. Sadly, far too many people find themselves falsely imprisoned by their circumstances. Someone or something is holding them back or holding them down, and they surrender the authority that God gave them just like Adam did. And we, without awareness, are creating things around us that we don't like. Now, I tell you all of that to get us warmed up to talk about trust. We're going to talk about trust. What is trust? Definition. I have to bring this with me here. It is the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. Trust is the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. Now, there's things that we trust every day, right? We trust it. When you sat down today, you had trust that the chair would hold you, right? You had trust, even if you don't know how it works. Do I have any electricians in the room? Is there anybody in here that's ever wired something? A couple of you? Those of us that haven't, we have this amazing trust that when we flip a light switch, what's going to happen? The light will come on. You don't have any idea how it happens, but you have the trust. But you have the trust. Now, have you ever had a situation where somebody broke their trust with you? We all have, right? I don't want to make this more awkward, but we've all had that scenario where somebody, like yesterday, the referees broke their trust with me. It took about 3 minutes, and then I let it ruin the rest of my day, which I think that's the lesson I need to learn. But when it comes to trusting God's different. Trusting God is so different. Human trust can be broken. Trusting God cannot be broken. Trusting God cannot be broken. Numbers 23:19. God is not human that he should lie. Not a human being that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? It took me a long time to understand this. I was easily into my 30s. I was easily into my 30s before I started to be able to put my arms around this. God is so big, God is so powerful, that when he says something, when he says anything, all of creation has no choice but to make that thing happen. Now, it may not happen right away. It may take some time. But when he says, let there be light, all of creation works in such a way to make light. Now, I want to give you just a nuance here. There is a difference between faith and trust. Right? There's a nuanced difference, right? So, faith is believing God can. Anybody know anyone with any type of challenging circumstance today? Right? We all know somebody. We all know somebody that has some type of challenging circumstance. And by faith, you say, I believe God can do something. And you can say that with complete faith, right? God can restore that relationship. He can heal whatever. He can fix this. He can he? Yes, he can. What's trust? Trust is different, and trust is relying on him to do it. The example that was given to me, and I think this is a reasonable illustration, a child jumps into a parent's arms. Remember those days when like you can manhandle your kids? Like I don't have those days anymore. I can't throw the kids up in the air. I can't say, "Hey, jump down here to me." Like that'd be a bad. I'd get hurt. I'd get hurt really bad if any of my kids did that to me today. But a child jumping into a parent's arms, faith says they can catch me, but trust actually jumps. Trust actually jumps. Now, since we have dominion, we must learn to operate in trust. Since we have dominion, we must learn to operate in trust. But here's the challenge. Do we trust ourselves or do we trust God? We're going to read Proverbs chapter 3 now. And I want you just to pay attention to how this chapter opens up. Just pay like, this is what stuck out to, this is what was staring me in the face at 3 o'clock this morning. Proverbs chapter 3, starting at verse 1. He says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart." Now let me talk to the men. I'm not going to talk to the women on this. I know the answer to this. Men, have you ever forgotten anything? Like, we need to be, it becomes easy to forget, doesn't it? Proverbs chapter 3 starts off, "My son, do not forget my teaching." Why? Because it can be easy to forget. "But keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man." Verse 5, if I was a betting man, I would bet that you've heard this before in some way. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. For she," now remember, whenever we start talking about she, we've seen in the first 2 chapters, she is wisdom. That was how Solomon started to frame us. So we're going to see whenever we see she here for the next little bit, we're talking about wisdom. For she, wisdom, is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She, wisdom, is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed. By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge, the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Pause. Don't forget. He's telling us that because it can be easy to forget. I forgot this at 2 o'clock in the morning. My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. They will be life for you, an ornament to grace your neck. Then you will go on your way in safety, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Have no fear of sudden disaster or of the ruin that overtakes the wicked, for the Lord will be at your side and will keep your foot from being snared. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, come back tomorrow and I'll give it to you, when you already have it with you. Do not plot harm against your neighbor who lives trustfully near you. Do not accuse anyone for no reason when they have done you no harm. Do not envy the violent or choose any of their ways, for the Lord detests the perverse, but takes the upright into his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. The wise inherit honor, but fools get only shame. I need to take a drink after that. There's a couple things I want to just draw your attention to in this chapter. If you want to group Proverbs chapter 3 in some groups, I'm going to give you some groupings to consider. Verses 1 through 10 are the rewards for trust. All right? When we trust God, it brings blessing, peace, favor, provision, right? The wisdom leads to, trusting God leads to a long and peaceful life, leads to favor with God, it leads to straight paths, right? It honors God, which brings provision. The second thing I would bring to your attention is verses 11 and 12. And this is where he's talking about discipline, right? When you are disciplined, and this is something that the world gets a little bit sideways right now, at least in my opinion, right? There's this thing about discipline and being corrected. The writer of Proverbs says that the correction is a sign of God's love. Now, out of curiosity, how many people like to be corrected? Anybody? Nobody likes that? I don't really care for it. But as you go through it, I want you to be encouraged by it. I want you to be encouraged as you go through it. Now, I have a whole other perspective, like it may take a little bit longer if you want to be slow in learning the correction, right? But like we have those things to look at. God disciplines those he loves, like a father disciplines a child. In James, I'll just give you can take this note, we're short on time, but James chapter 1 verses 2 through 4 reminds us that trials produce endurance and maturity. Right? Don't be afraid of the trial. You don't necessarily have to like it, but don't be afraid of it. Understand what it brings to you, what the writer of Proverbs reminds us of. 13 through 26. Tells us that wisdom is better than wealth. Wisdom is more valuable than silver and gold. God founded the earth through wisdom. Wisdom leads to confidence and protection, right? There's a number of things that wisdom gives us. Then the last thing, verses 27 through 35. Trusting God leads to right relationships and integrity. Trusting God, right relationships, and integrity. A phrase that was given to me that I'll share with you this morning that I think is sometimes helpful. Actually, I guess I'll tell you that I'm finding it to be very helpful, is that trust recognizes that the truth may not always be in the appearance of things. Trust recognizes when we trust God, when we trust Him to make our paths straight, recognizes that the truth may not always be in the appearance of things. So I'm curious, have any of you ever had a kid come home from school with a clear little Dixie cup filled with dirt and a flower? Have any of you, like, you laugh?
I'm laughing because it doesn't last long.
Oh, no, it doesn't usually make it home, right? But like, as an aside, I have this whole idea what I could like, but never mind. This is like. Did you ever do that? Did you ever plant a flower when you were in school? Anybody? Like this was a reasonably common thing, right? There was a day that teacher didn't want to teach or something. They said, you know what, we're going to play in dirt. Right? That's what we're doing today. And so what they did is they got out these little cups, and maybe in my day it was a styrofoam cup, but now they're fancy plastic cups and they're sort of clear, right? So you can see in there. And they put the dirt in, and you plant the seed, and then you put some water in it, you put it on the windowsill, and then what happened the next day? If you came and you looked at that cup, what was there? Nothing. Hadn't changed. And so what did you do? You watered the cup, put it back on the windowsill, you went home, you came in the next day, and what did you see? Nothing. And you watered the cup, and you put it on the windowsill, and you went home. And you did this day after day after day after day. And then you finally came back one day, and there was your cup, and there all you could see was dirt, but you know what? Little Jimmy, his had begun to sprout. Right? You could see a little green. You remember those? Like, or were you all the overachievers that had like the full flower? Like, some of us are just there. We're watering dirt. We just keep watering dirt, right? Like, I mean, some of us, like some people had these nice big flowers to take home. Some of us, barely had the sprout. Like, but it was like, hey, we got to get this stuff out of here. It's not going to last over spring break. You got to get this home, right? What was happening on each of those days? What was happening? Every day you watered, every day that you trusted how God works, what was happening? The seed was growing. And you didn't see it. Sometimes the truth is not in the appearance of things. Last week I shared the story of the Chinese bamboo tree. And I told you about how you had to plant that seed and you had to care for it for years and years and years and years before it would finally break through the ground. And for years, you can't see anything's happening. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Pastor's going to be preaching on Joseph the next couple of weeks. Joseph goes through some stuff. He goes, like, you can read that story and And if you put yourself in Joseph's situation, you would say, I would rather not be here. But sometimes the truth is not in the appearance of things. I was trying to figure out a way to use this analogy, but you could take a bunch of steel, a bunch of wires, all this different equipment, and you could put it out in the parking lot, and we could look at it, and we would say, you know what? If we push this into the water, it would just sink down to the bottom. But if we put it together the right way, it can become a cruise ship. Right? How is it that a cruise ship floats? Oh, and you have your phone with you? See how much a cruise ship weighs. I'm going to guess it's more than a ton. How on earth does that work? If I had another kid, you have a phone? Can you have Dad's phone? Can you find out how much an airplane weighs? What does an airplane weigh? You got something for me?
Hundreds of thousands of tons.
Hundreds of thousands of tons. How does that not go right to the bottom of the ocean? You know what an airplane weighs?
A few thousand pounds for a small plane to over 1 million pounds for a large commercial airline.
Over 1 million pounds. How does that happen? Sometimes the truth is not in the appearance of things. What do you trust? What do you trust? Because the way God works, man, it's... As we go through life, things can happen that can be quite challenging. Does that mean that you no longer trust God? You could have millions, thousands of pounds of stuff. It can become a boat. It can become an airplane. Right? Some people go through the hard stuff and they decide that they're not going to trust God anymore. And I think that's why in Proverbs chapter 3 it starts out with a reminder, don't forget. Don't forget. I don't know about you, but I do need to be reminded. I needed to be reminded just a few hours ago. Don't forget this wisdom. Because if you forget this wisdom, you can lose out on all sorts of benefits. So I'm going to just challenge you this morning to consider this. Where is God asking you to trust Him more right now? Where is He? My guess is He's challenging you somewhere. My guess is that He's challenging us somewhere. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 tells us to trust in the Lord with all our hearts and lean not on our own understanding. Do any of you know how an airplane is made or how it works? Do you have that understanding? You just get on the airplane and go somewhere. Do you understand how a cruise ship floats? How that all works? I don't. I guess the example falls apart. I've never been on a cruise ship. But I know some people do. Some people love it, right? You know, there's people that do. You don't have to understand how it works. You do have to trust it. You do have to trust it. This week, I want to challenge you to be the cause. I want to challenge you to recognize your identity as a follower of Jesus. To recognize just your position. You are princes, you are princesses. I want to challenge you to be causative. I want you to speak life wherever there's doubt. I want you to walk in confidence as a child of the King. And I want to encourage you to take action where you've been hesitating as you go out this week. Trust is not passive. Trust requires movement. And so I want to encourage you to take action in trust this week. As I wrap up, I'll put 3 letters on the board as I do each week, the letters A, C, T. And I want to ask you, based on what you've learned this morning, what action will you take? What change will you make? And is there something that you learned here this morning that you could teach to somebody else for your benefit and for theirs?